Blood pressure. Changing habits may not lower blood pressure was in the news. I think this was in February or March, which I actually kind of don't really believe. There are always trials that are done on large populations of people that look to say, does it make a difference to the population? I try to believe that my patients who make a change in their lifestyle, if they follow some easy things, it may actually lower their blood pressure. But what is blood pressure? Anybody have any ideas? What is your blood pressure?
Stress.
Stress. Okay. The blood going through your heart. Well, your blood pressure is actually measured as the blood going through your arteries. And it's the force of your heart that pumps the blood out. And what we're actually measuring is how much pressure goes this way on the outside. And the question always becomes, is how is it measured? And the answer is with the blood pressure cuff. And the doctor will often give you a number like this, 134/72. The top number is the amount, the force, that the maximum pressure that happens when your heart pumps out. But your heart is like is a pump in a system, and your blood actually never stops moving. And so the lower number is your blood pressure when your heart is relaxed at the most, just before it's about to pump again. So you're constantly having blood going forward. This is the top number, this is the bottom number. Which one's more important?
Bottom.
I got to vote for a bottom. Bottom. I actually think they're both quite important, and neither of them should be ignored. There's some people that say the top number, some say the bottom number. Some people say if the difference is larger that it's more important. They're actually both important for various different reasons, but the goal is always to prevent bad things from happening to you. And the bad things that happen to you with blood pressure that it can cause, the common things, strokes, heart attacks, circulation problems in your legs, and kidney problems. Those are the big four that we try to prevent, and that's why doctors are pretty aggressive with blood pressure control. I've avoided putting doctor slides. These are the type of slides that if you ever go to a medical or a doctor's talk, they'll show lots of graphs that look like this. Because the question always comes up is, what's normal? Or how low should my blood pressure be? And this is the Mr. Fit trial. For anybody who's in medicine, we always like fancy, sexy names. And all the good trials have nice letters. So Mr. Fit. This was even done in the 80s, I believe, and published in the 90s. And what they did is they took people and they said, what blood pressure was better than the next number, which is better than the next number. And they grouped people with blood pressures of 120 to 140, and so on and so forth. And they actually were never able to find a number where the lower number was less beneficial than the higher number. So the lower your blood pressure is, actually, the more protective it actually becomes. The difference, though, the drop was around here. This is where the benefit really started to be apparent, was when you were around 140. And down here, when you were around 90, which is why, and the same thing goes for stroke. You were actually never able to, the lower your blood pressure, the lower your risk of stroke. That is why the normal, I'm going to skip this because, is 140/90. That's what they've determined is the cutoff for a normal blood pressure in your doctor's office. In your doctor's office. If you are at home and you take your blood pressure, or your doctor uses a 5-in-1 blood pressure, they target 135/85. And if you have diabetes or kidney problems, the target is 130/80. Those are what the guidelines are telling us what our target blood pressures should be. So what could we, yeah, sorry?
I have a question about what if you have low blood pressure?
What is too low?
How about 81?
81.
49?
The actual answer I tell people is when you pass out. Or you're symptomatic of your low blood pressure. Because I go back to that Mr. Fit trial, they were actually never able to show that low blood pressure was worse than higher blood pressure. Even 120 was better than 130. 130 was better than 140. The difference is does treating to those levels make any sense? And I go back to my rule number 2, the rule for patients. You can go bungee jumping, you can go skydiving, you can walk for a park. You can't fall and break your hip. If you pass out because of your low blood pressure because of a pill I gave you and you break your hip, that breaks my rule of not killing the patient. And so it's all about balance. I typically target to get my patients below 140 over 90 if I can do so safely. If I give them a blood pressure pill and sometimes they go to 110 and feel lightheaded and dizzy, I tolerate a little bit higher blood pressure. In general, though, you try to get people below that level to lower the risk of the complications.
So there's no bad side effects except from passing out?
Nope. It really is, unless you're symptomatic of it. And low blood pressure as a problem is, especially over time, is not really that common. It's some fairly rare diseases that will cause bottoming out blood pressure, make people passing out. If people are really sick and they have infections, they can lower their blood pressure over a short time, but that's usually for an acute illness, not for anything long term. So, what are the dietary recommendations to lower your blood pressure? So, high fresh fruits, high vegetables, high and low fat dairy products, dietary insoluble fiber, plant protein, low saturated fat, and low in sodium. Sodium, I think, is going to be the next trans fat issue. I've been to a number of conferences over the past couple of years, and every year they trot out the health minister of whatever province I'm at, and for some reason they start talking about sodium. Sodium is becoming very politically sexy, and I anticipate it'll work its way into our regulations at some point. There's a lot of sodium in a lot of places, and sodium is not just salt. There's a lot of preservatives that are used that are sodium something. And so there's a lot of sodium in places. So how much salt are we supposed to take? So 2,300 milligrams of sodium is about a teaspoon. And now they were recommending over 70 that you have less than 1,200 milligrams of sodium a day, which is about half a teaspoon, basically, of sodium a day of intake. That's a lot. That's very little. And so to get there would require people to pay very, very, very much attention to their labels and to what they eat. But the thing is that 80% of most of our diets, 80% of our sodium comes from pre-processed foods. So it comes from things that we already buy, already made. Only about 10% comes from what we shake on the table or what we add when we're cooking. So 10 to 20% from that, but 80% is actually in what's already made. They did a study where they looked at, in Canada actually, if we had lowered our salt intake to this, we'd have 1 million fewer cases of high blood pressure, 5 million fewer doctor visits, 13% reduction in death, and we'd save $1.3 billion a year. And so this is why I think governments are going to start to get behind it. There's a lot of money to be saved and a lot of people to be saved. So what foods to target? Fruits and vegetables are good for you. Eat them. Canned foods, you'd be amazed how much salt is actually found in canned food. A lot of the preservatives and the mechanisms of putting the liquid in the cans, they actually have a lot of sodium in there. So you either rinse them really, 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 really well, or you go for the fresh stuff. I don't even have to start talking about fast food. Those things are usually terrible.
But there are some brands, I mean, there are a lot of those now canned, no salt.
Well, they say no salt added, or...
But it says
yes,
0 sodium.
but you have to look for the sodium. It's not just salt.
No,
And yeah, they're
what else do you look for? Other than
so
the
if you look on the label, you look actually in Canada on your dietary, you know, on the boxes of cereal, you'll always see those recommendations. The sodium is one of the things that you actually have to declare. And so if you have more than 300 milligrams of sodium in a serving size, that's starting to get a lot. And so you have to actually have to get good at looking at labels to see how much sodium is actually located inside everything.
I'm talking about canned stuff.
Even on cans. So like on the side of the can, they will actually say sodium, and they'll give you milligrams. If it's more than 300, it's probably more than you probably should have.
Okay, no, so it's the sodium you have to look for.
It's the
nothing
sodium.
else. If it says 0, you know that there's no sodium.
Right.
Even,
Unless they're lying, which I doubt they would.
okay.
If you don't have a problem with high blood pressure, do you have to be as careful about the sodium?
Good question. How do you know you're not going to develop high blood pressure? I mean, the high blood pressure used to be classically called hardening of the arteries. As we get older, our arteries get less and less compliant. They get stiffer. And so that's why as people get older, they tend to get higher blood pressure over time. In the very, very old, nobody here qualifies as that, by the way, you can get, your blood pressure can actually start going down again. But typically, people's blood pressure go up and up and up. But sodium independently probably is not great for you in vast, vast, vast quantities. You're asking your kidneys to filter it, because your kidneys are the organ that has to deal with it. And as we get older, no matter what happens, our kidneys become less functional. So in general, our diets in North America suck when it comes to salt intake. It's our addictions to fast foods and prepared foods. The other thing is as we get older, people lose their taste buds. And to get the same effect of saltiness, you actually have to put more salt on it. And so people as they get older tend to put even more salt. So yes.
I was wondering, is there a different standard for older people as what kind of blood pressure you should have?
So there's a all the sexy diseases and conditions have a website. And so for blood pressure, it's hypertension.ca. And diabetes.ca, cholesterol.com, they all have osteoporosis.ca, they all have websites. They actually, every year, will update the Canadian guidelines for high blood pressure. And they actually don't have a different target for older people. If you look at some of the studies, in the older people, so people over 80, 150 over 90 was the target of those studies. So in the very old, you could argue that you shouldn't target more than lowering less than 150 over 90. But in terms of the national guidelines, it's still 140 over 90 is the general recommendation. But that's a guideline. Everybody has to say, does this guideline apply to me? And guidelines are not the gospel, it's not the Bible. It's a good place to start a discussion. And so if you can get down to 140 safely, it's probably better than 150. But if it's at the risk of falling and passing out, no. Any other questions? Alcohol tends to have a lot of sodium. All of it does. So limit the amount of alcohol consumption. And alcohol independently can raise your blood pressure as well. Exercise. Exercise can lower your blood pressure. And they say 30 to 60 minutes, 4 to 7 times per week. And that can be enough to get your heart pumping and makes it just difficult enough that you can't really have a fluid conversation while you're doing the exercise. So for whatever that is for you, that might be enough to get your heart going and to help lower your risk of having high blood pressure. Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, sorry? Swimming absolutely counts. Swimming may not help you build big muscles, but it can actually work your heart pretty good and you can pump. As long as while you're doing it, you're not just sitting there strolling and you have to move. You have to move. Obesity never helps. Men tend to have the belly that looks like this more than women, and that also as well is not a good sign for high blood pressure. Smoking. I would be remiss if I didn't say quitting smoking was important. The best day to quit smoking was yesterday. Today is okay. I can live with tomorrow, but as long as it's literally tomorrow. Within 48 hours of quitting smoking, people actually start getting better. So it's never, never, never too late to quit smoking. That's my pitch for today for smoking. And what if all of these dietary and lifestyle modifications are not enough? Pills. And this is actually cholesterol pills. I actually realized I just put up the wrong picture. But medications do exist. And for that, you usually have to take the treatment for the rest of your life. It's not something that you can take a pill, oh, my blood pressure goes down and stop the pill. Your blood pressure will probably go up within a couple of hours, if not a couple of days. And so for that, you should talk to your doctor. And I showed this picture to a younger crowd, and they have absolutely no idea who he is.